Welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts, where we aim to encourage and foster discussion, learning, and creating an informed global community. To view this and other interviews in detail, head over to theseer.org, linked in the description. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel for constant updates. Enjoy the episode.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts. Joining us here today, we are very, very fortunate to have Leeor, who is a partner and head of asset management at Blockchain Valley Ventures over in Switzerland and Singapore as well. Leeor, it is absolutely wonderful to have you here today. I just want to start by asking, how are you? How are things on the other end of the world over in Switzerland right now?
Excellent. Thanks for having me here, guys, and really a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Fortunately, it's the middle of summer here in Europe, and I think people are trying to put COVID behind them and get back to their daily lives. So fingers crossed from here, we don't need to go back into another lockdown and are able to continue with the new normal, I guess, of socially distanced working and life balance.
Absolutely. And I mean, hopefully with the vaccine, the next few lockdowns won't be like the ones we've had in the past. Hopefully we can start returning back to how things were. That's if things actually go back to how things were, who knows? But yeah, anyway, what I think we all want to know first as we start this interview is, I guess, just who are you? I mean, what made you want to go into the whole venture capitalist world? What made you interested in the fields of emerging tech, everything like that?
Yeah, look, so, I mean, it's really one of the areas I'm most passionate about because I think first, before I ever learned about venture capital or what it was, I've always been intrigued by the idea of entrepreneurs and the way in which people can go out and build organizations, cultures, communities, which really shape and define what we do. And I think that was the first fundamental, let's say, eye-opener to what is possible and what can people do with their times to make an impact, especially given this day and age and you know, the access that we have to technology and all of these fun things that make the 21st century such a great place to be. And the more time I spent working with private companies, family businesses, entrepreneurs, it became clear to me that this is really the sector where the basis of innovation and development happens. And of course, companies grow and become large public companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, etc. All of these great things happen, but they all started with, you know, one or two people somewhere for some reason coming together to build something that they thought was meaningful. And that was really, I guess, the transition to understanding, you know, what were the enablers of them to do this and go on that long journey to create such companies and organizations, right? And that's where I really stumbled across venture capital. So I think, you know, having spent the last 8 years in Europe, basically between London and Switzerland, working in and around many different ecosystems, entrepreneurs, building companies, I think that's really what got me so passionate about what is venture capital, how do people come behind and back entrepreneurs to live that vision. And here I am now 3.5 years into our company, which we set up to really back companies within a specific sector. Yeah, couldn't be more happier and excited about the types of things we're doing with the types of people that we're supporting.
Awesome. And I'll be honest with you, you know, probably until when I was in high school, I had little to no understanding at all into what a venture capitalist firm even was, how it operated, what it is. And I think that's because, look, I can go into uni and I can take a course in engineering. I can take a course in medicine. I can go take a course in economics. But have you ever seen someone offer just a straight course, an undergraduate course in venture capitalism? Probably not. And I think that's because of the lack of exposure. And with that, I wanted to ask you, I guess, what are the skills then? If you can't take a course in it, if it's not taught from a young age, how do you learn how to get into the VC world? And I guess what separates someone ahead from everyone else in this world?
Mm-hmm. So I think this is probably one of the more contentious topics, right? Because it's similar to entrepreneurship. Like, can it be, you know, taught, or is it learned, or is it, you know, something that's within you from day zero, let's say? And that's why, I mean, you know, many people and organizations have started structuring courses for entrepreneurship models, so accelerator programs, or even at Melbourne Uni, right, there's the Wade Institute at Ormond College. So, you know, there's a few things here and there where people are learning how to go through structured journeys, which, you know, should catapult them into entrepreneurship. And I see venture capital much a similar way, right? So, of course, there are some basic principles of of finance and understanding, that's effectively what it is. So how do you finance entrepreneurial endeavors, and what can you do with that money to, let's say, grow and propel companies to achieve things at a later date? And I think that's really a new idea. In terms of teaching it, right, I think, or what it is to be taught, it's really basically, it's an area which I think just demands such a robust set of skills, right? It's the same as it being an entrepreneur. One day you're selling contracts to clients, enterprise contracts, retail contracts. The next day you're doing the bookkeeping, accounting, and then you come home to do some tax planning, and then suddenly you're trying to come up with employment contracts to hire a new person to do your development and tech work. So those are really not things which fit into any one specific category or a course catalog, which is how universities are designed. It's kind of like you go through life and every year you file a tax return, so you probably know something about tax, even if it's not corporate tax. And those are kind of things that you learn and see. So I'm not surprised that there's no specific courses that really get people into that, although I think that that's definitely something that needs to change, because there's a lot of basic pillars and foundations that could help a lot of people become familiar with what I think is probably the most exciting profession outside of being an entrepreneur yourself in the 21st century. Yeah.
So it was about like 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I interviewed this guy called Jonathan Aberman, and he's essentially a dean at the University of Marymount, and he spent a large portion of his life teaching entrepreneurship and so on, looking at things such as innovation in society and everything like that. And I asked him, is it ever an age where it's too young to be an entrepreneur? And he straight up just told me, you've missed the point. Because there's no one age where you become an entrepreneur. It's essentially a part of life. It's how it's inherent in you, and through your failures along your journey, that's how you improve as an entrepreneur. So I want to take that question, and I probably want to ask it to what you just said. Is there ever an age where it's too young to enter the VC world?
So let me turn it around again and say, I agree that there's no such thing, because, what are we measuring at the end of the day? I mean, there is no final outcome. I mean, what is defining a successful entrepreneur? For some people might be selling a company for 20 million. For some people, it might be for 2 billion, right? So I think that it's an open-ended question, which I think we have to define success and how we measure that for ourselves. In terms of factually speaking though, and if you look at the average age at which people are getting funded, I mean, I think that there are specific metrics, right? So, I mean, entrepreneurs under the age of 28 tend to get backed. And then by the age of 38 is the average age of a unicorn business founder. So, I mean, there are statistics around that on the entrepreneur side. On the venture capital side, right, I think so people who back those people typically should have two things. So one, they should be crazy enough themselves to have at least tried and or failed in their own business ventures themselves, or two, wanting to make long-term commitments to support other founders for whatever reason. So I don't think there's a right or wrong age to enter this, but I think in terms of the value add and the way that you position, your relationships and what you bring to the table as an investor, certainly these are things which do take time to build. And if you're an 18-year-old or a 28-year-old, I don't think that's the differentiator. It's really, what have you done with your time? What are you looking to achieve? And is that something that can support other people on their journey? Because at the end of the day, I mean, venture capital is taking minority stakes in companies. It's not private equity where you're buying out firms to take ownership and replace management. You're going, it's the entrepreneurs that you're backing to do good things and make good decisions, and you help them, not the other way around. So frankly, there is no such thing as being too young to identify other ambitious people that you want to support. It's just a matter of the way in which you do that, I think, which, continues to change day in, day out.
So in that answer, you said essentially you have to be crazy enough to fail. With that, I want to ask you, can you think of a specific moment through any of your ventures where I guess you experienced this significant point of failure where, something just didn't go the way you thought it was actually going to go? And what did you learn from that? And what was going in your head when that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, immediately the first thing that comes to my mind is my own entrepreneurial pursuits, right? So when I first moved to Switzerland in 2016, I first of all was studying here. I did a master's program in management, and then came out very keen to hit the ground running. So we set up a company with one of my best friends, brilliant guy. So I think together we had, two pretty ambitious people keen to take on the world and set up a company in the peer-to-peer electricity markets here. So decentralized electricity markets in Europe are a pretty common thing, with the exception of Switzerland, which still runs a centralized electricity system. And we were told, there's going to be a law reform coming, and the markets here are going to liberalize and open up, and the retailers are going to start having to compete with each other. So we thought, let's apply some of the models we've seen, being battle tested and coming through in Germany, the UK, the US, and let's be the first ones on the market to bring that to Switzerland. So super excited to do that. We set up our company. We got some funding actually from a local incubator who gave us some grant financing, and really went to the market. So we got some partners who were interested in the concept and everything that we were doing. Realistically, what was happening in the background was a huge legal and regulatory development. And that was a process that, in Switzerland, this is a country which has direct democracy. So for things to happen here, one thing is for there to be a law change. Second thing is for that to be implemented in practice. So I remember this was in May 2016, they took the vote saying, we're going to liberalize the markets. Still to this day, May or August 2021, they have not implemented the reforms that we had built our business on in 2016, 17, dedicating huge amounts of time and resources. So I think those are the types of things where, of course, in our mind, it's like, the whole world operates this way. Switzerland's going to catch up and we're going to be the ones to capture it. In our minds, that's like a 6 to 12 month process, which is, again, just shows you the kind of mindset and the long-term thinking you need when engaging in this space, because things aren't always what they seem on paper, right? And until you've actually gone in, spent the time, wasted the time in a certain sector and made those lessons over how slow regulatory reforms can really be in practice, you don't really know what's happening on the ground when you're talking about regulated industries and so forth, which has been tremendously helpful today working in the fintech sector, which is one of the most regulated industries. And a lot of things get thrown around, and seeing how they get implemented is always an interesting thing that I monitor closely.
I won't lie, you are making me a bit scared here, because at the start of the year, ScoMo did say that international students would be let back into Australia at the end of the year. So let's just hope that actually happens.
Mate, I'm still trying to be let back into Australia. So let's see what the pecking order is. But as you can see, execution versus implementation are two very different things.
Absolutely. With that, so I wanted to specifically talk about, I guess, the role of Gen Z, and essentially what's happening now with students. What are the kind of fields they like to go into? And I think what arguably sets Gen Z apart from so many other generations is that a lot of them are intrinsically interested in many social issues, things such as climate change and so on. However, there's often this common notion that there's this trade-off which exists between the extent to which an initiative is socially good and the extent to which you can financially gain from that. I think it was our 24th interview with this guy called Jack Sim, who essentially founded the World Toilet Organization, who spoke of this exact thing. It's that the incentives are placed in the wrong fields at the moment. And I think we even saw this week certain investment bank firms such as Goldman Sachs are now having first year salaries at like 100K, which is just like 5 times the average in Australia here for someone who leaves uni. So obviously what we have here is a system where the incentives arguably aren't lined up in the right way. And I wanted to ask if you think this notion is going to hold into the remainder of the 21st century, and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, it's a very interesting point. So I think, first of all, on the topic of Gen Z, I think there's never been a more privileged group of people to come through, right? The digital literacy, the availability of technology, and the simplicity by which anyone can now go out and set up a company, run a web hosting service on Amazon, locally, on-prem, wherever you want it to be. I'd say the cost to set up a company and run a technology business today has never been, more accessible for anyone. So, while we may talk about some wage inflation and certain sectors who are profiting disproportionately, I think this is the most exciting time. And that's why, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to, speak with and work with young, ambitious people. And, it wasn't too long ago that I was the young and ambitious, and now seeing more younger and more ambitious people come through is a very positive thing, right? And I think that level of social responsibility that people have is basically the only way I see us addressing these major challenges. And I think the best example of this I ever heard was, when you're on the hamster wheel, and that's what I would consider probably people like myself. So we're on the hamster wheel. We've kind of accepted the way the world is, and probably, of course, all acknowledge that there's ways to do things better. But it isn't until you step outside and start looking at it from, the bottom up again, or top down reverse now, in the context of what's happening. So in Australia, for example, we have many different forms of taxes: income tax, inheritance tax, stamp duty, whatever it is. So all of these things, goods and services tax. And if we line up all of the different things that we have, and you think, why aren't we taxing carbon? Like, of all the things that we tax, why are we not taxing this thing, which is creating by far the most externalities? So from an economics perspective, it makes no sense to not tax this thing. From a societal perspective, it's draining, at least 1/3 of the public discourse and debate around what the hell do we do with renewables or transitioning away from this. And the whole rest of the world looks at Australia and says, why the hell is their CO2 consumption per capita through the roof? And we're sitting here not able to turn on a light. So all of these things, which is just like, from an ideological perspective, it makes no sense that we have all of these taxes that have just evolved over time. And you can make an argument for taxing goods and services so that you can pay for healthcare in a system. So, when you're on the hamster wheel, you can continue to justify what you're doing. But it really takes a kind of new perspective and fresh group of people who have not seen the development of all of these other taxes being introduced, come out and say, why the hell are we not taxing this thing, which is a far bigger problem than all of these other things that we think we're solving? And that's what I think Gen Z has today. So you have not only people who are aware that things are not right, but you also have all of the resources and tools to go out and change it. So never been more bullish on an opportunity set in my life. And if there was any way to directly back a generation, that would be my venture capital bet of the century, right? Is backing this group of people to go out and make this change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're at this age where just content, information, ideas, everything has been democratized to such an extent. If I have a phone, if I have internet, I can probably go and see anything. I can probably listen to anyone. And yeah, there you go.
Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. To learn more about Orakui, as well as more information about our upcoming episodes, don't forget to follow our socials for constant updates and education content. Links are always in the description.
So I'm going to leave it there for myself. I'm going to pass it over to Joel now, the proper tech expert. And yeah, over to you.
Not sure I'd call myself a proper tech expert, but I really like the sort of points you made about Gen Z in terms of, I think, at least personally, the internet has been like a big leveler for almost like the opportunities that it has created. The barriers to entry are the lowest they have ever been. It's completely unprecedented. I made my first business when I was 13 by setting up a website, and I mean, you can run it and that's it. And the things some kids have been doing is they're absolutely ridiculous. And it's because the number of opportunities you can find online is absolutely incredible. And yeah, I really like that sort of point that you made. Now I wanted to ask, so blockchain's it's a pretty recent kind of technology. And, when you were studying in the University of Melbourne, I imagine you might have little sort of conceptualization. Many students today would probably find themselves in a similar place, though, soon working in fields that don't currently exist because, technology is really evolving quite quickly. And so my question was, as students, do you think there's a way that we can try and prepare for jobs that don't necessarily exist? What kind of skills that we can try? Are there any kind of skills that we can try and develop to sort of navigate the spaces that we don't quite know exist yet?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really kind of my main takeaway from the reason why I was so glad to, not only having studied in Australia, and obviously University of Melbourne is a great place to learn, but also having had the opportunity to go abroad and be completely taken out of the comfort zone, working and studying in a country which speaks a different language and all of these factors, and going through that soft skill development process. And I think the role more and more of education is, of course, very specific skills. And if you're studying software and computer engineering at the moment, IT and many other professions, let's say, I mean, these are fundamental and foundational towards, a technology revolution that still needs to be built. So of course, everything's available, but there are still people building it, right? And I think that's a key point. But then for everyone else who's like, let's say, more indirectly participating in it, and as an entrepreneur, I mean, most entrepreneurs that we see they are themselves not CTOs, right? I think those days where Mark Zuckerberg, sits in the garage developing the software itself. I mean, this is becoming rarer and rarer. Not to discredit or discount their ability to build great companies, but what it is to be a successful entrepreneur, as well as an investor, right? I mean, it's less to do with the actual technical competence of what you're doing, but it's more to do with the robustness of your skills and your ability to navigate, let's say, corporate hierarchies and sales channels, boardrooms, different, kind of stakeholders and management process. And these are things which are inherently soft skills. And that really is best developed when you're outside of your comfort zone and not kind of sitting at home, twiddling your thumbs, but really out there speaking to a diverse group of people, learning things that are not in the textbook, but really kind of just in that environment alone. So, the role of university, I think, is clear in terms of giving people a structured place to learn. But the actual coursework and content, I think, is becoming less relevant in contrast to what is all of the things that you have around the coursework, which is student clubs, exchange programs, and all of these other opportunities you have to go out there and give things a go. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that one thing that has sort of, or at least in my opinion, I've kind of found is that EQ skills can sometimes be quite underrated, and they can come in really handy. And that's a thread that has run through some of the previous interviews that I've been on. And I remember one engineer in particular, he said, while he studied, engineering throughout university, one of the most important things he developed was through a sort of society he had set up. And it was communication with sort of those in higher positions than him, because that's something he never got to practice. But sort of through his organization, he managed to do that. And then it's, yielded dividends over time. So yeah, I think soft skills is something that isn't really acknowledged by too many education systems right now. But by sort of seeking that discomfort, it's definitely something you can expose yourself to. Now, having lived in Zurich, London, Melbourne, all over the place between so many different countries, and even Singapore, you've sort of lived quite the international lifestyle. So, assuming an employer asked you during an interview, what has the international experience provided you with that other candidates don't have? What would your answer look like?
I think it really ties in great with what we've just touched on, right? It's really that idea of, the relationship between input and output is so unclear today. So just because you go and study something doesn't mean you're going to come out of that program with a specific idea of something or capability or competence. There's so many different things that you do during your studies, during your work, during your life, which shape who you are as a person. And I think that that's really, when you live in a foreign country where you're kind of de facto a minority, not speaking the local languages, or even if you do in Singapore, for example, having a different cultural understanding of what's going on. It's really that idea of being able to adapt to the setting you're in. And I think that that's something that people, resonates with people and they can appreciate, because at the end of the day, when you're especially an entrepreneur, right? I mean, no one is sitting there with a checklist of things to say, have you done this? Of course, investors will hold you accountable to that. But actually what defines success is not the checklist. It's there's a guy or girl in charge here who is delivering on all of the aspects that it requires to be successful. And because this person has gone through that, knows the process, knows the pains, knows the difficulties, and has been able to manage building their lives in different environments, different places, they're resilient enough and they get things done. And I think that that's really what being in an international environment has always brought out, at least in me. It's really that idea that, don't measure me based on where I'm from, but on what I can do in a group, in a team here, and hold your own merits accountable for the things you're able to achieve. And that's really what sums up, I think, that diversity of experience and exposure you have when you step outside the comfort zone and especially into the global competitive landscape.
Yeah, definitely. I think exposing yourself, it's really about sort of that seeking discomfort kind of thing, and exposing yourself to different worlds where you have to work in sort of different circumstances. It can be really, really powerful. Leading on from that sort of idea about how to sort of take experiences and then cultivate the sort of reap the rewards of those different experiences. Many students who might listen to this podcast, they might be in their early years of their careers, working through internships or apprenticeships. And as someone who's, been in that position as well, or is currently working with some interns too, I thought I might ask, what kind of advice would you give to them to sort of reap their rewards? Or even someone not necessarily in an internship, but just sort of seeking new experiences, moving to a new place they haven't before, and putting themselves out there. What do you think is the way to try and sort of cultivate as much as you can out of that?
Yeah, look, I think it's always a topic of like really trying as much as you can, right? Put your hand up for everything. And I think, if you are in a position where you don't have let's say the financial need to go out and take the first job that you get to pay the bills or whatever it is, I mean, take every opportunity you can to experience different environments. So large corporates, maybe you want to do consulting or accounting and auditing, etc., especially for commerce graduates. But couple that always with the opportunity to at least work with or intern with a startup, where you see a completely 180 of what it is to be a company. So that idea of what a company is on paper exists, but until you've been inside an organization and lived and breathed its culture and what that looks like in practice, it's still like fundamentally just a construct, right? You can't appreciate it. So just from my own experience, I think I would have done over to this date, including after masters and everything, would have done at least 10 internships over the years. And that's always been the most, really the most valuable thing. And I tell you, some of them were obviously unpaid as well, right? So these are not things where, it pays the bills, but it's really the thing that you take out of it is diversity of experience, the network of people that you meet, and building those relationships with people, I think is the most impactful thing you can do with your time. So if you are in a privileged enough position to try different things, I mean, I would always recommend that people not run into the first opportunity at a big, shiny Big Four firm, but at least do, a summer or two interning here or there and trying things for themselves. If it's not for another entrepreneur or company, then try your own and see what you take out of that process. And that's really my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I always like to say a good sign that we've had a solid interview is if we've actually run over the time limit. And I think we are starting to. So I will conclude the interview with asking you the final question. This is the classic question we ask everyone we interview, and it's often called the hardest question. And essentially what it is if you could leave young people with just one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice actually be?
Oh, that is a tough one. So it's maybe not a specific piece of advice, but I think it's a bit of a motto that I always like to reference myself against, right? And reality check things with. But it's really the notion that, winners, it's winners forget they're in a race. They just love to run, right? And I think it's this idea that if you're going out and trying to do stuff for the sake of doing stuff, you're probably not going to get as far as the people who are fully committed and fully behind what they're doing. So, day in, day out, fully passionate about and motivated and committed to what they're doing. So at the end of the day, it's a matter of finding what you're passionate about, and that's a process. So for everyone, that's a different process and a different journey. But that journey is what you always bring to the table. And if you're really doing something to be competitive or to compete at it, you better bloody love it, because otherwise the people who do are going to be 10 times better at you or more committed to reaching outcomes and success. So I think unless you're fully behind what you're doing, recognize it early enough to pack up and move on, or else, you probably end up somewhere where you didn't think you'd be in 20 years' time.
There we have it. Thank you very much, Leeor. Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Insights with Experts. And again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.